Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Camden Club. How are you doing tonight? Woo! That's pretty good. But our very special guest tonight is used to stadium audiences. So we're going to do that intro again, and I need you each to be a stadium in your own right. So welcome to the Camden Club. How are you doing tonight? Woo! I am so thrilled with what's going to happen tonight because we are going to be talking to someone very, very special who's got an incredible book that has been my constant companion on the Northern Line from Waterloo to Chalk Farm Station for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And we've had a journey together, and I get the opportunity tonight not only to welcome him to the stage, but to talk to him, to discuss the book, talk about his life, his career, and for you guys to ask questions as well. So let me explain a bit about what we've got set up. Over here, we have Giovanni, ladies and gentlemen. Give him a big round of applause. Come forward, Giovanni. He's got the Make Italia Great hat on, so you know he is, LA. He's got the radio mic as well. Not only is he mixing the sound, so if you have a question, don't be too formal, but just put your hand up. And Gio will try and make his way over and give you the radio mic, and then we can ask the question. It's going to be a little bit informal tonight, and there's going to be some live music, and there's going to be all kinds of stuff happening, and all kinds of stuff we haven't even planned may happen. So all I ask you to do now is please put your hands together, remember the stadium energy, and welcome to the stage, Commander Phil Palmer.
What an introduction.
Well, you are Commander now, right?
Commander, oh.
You started as a private.
Yeah, I did, yes.
Right.
That's what Steve Ferroni used to call me, yeah.
Exactly. We're going to be talking... How many people have read the book, by the way? All right, how many people have not read the book? How many people have just wandered in and don't know what we're doing? Okay, right. So, obviously tonight we are celebrating the life, the work, and the recorded history of it all, which, for those of you who haven't already bought the book, you can buy and take home. I'm not going to reveal everything because it's a great story to be told, but...
And I'll sign it later. And
exactly. So you can ask questions, you can be part of the whole journey, the next part of this journey. Do you know what when I first started reading it, it put me a little bit in mind of a book called Diary of a Rock and Roll Star. Do you remember that book?
No.
So that was Ian Hunter.
Ian Hunter, okay.
Mott the Hoople,
yes.
Their first tour in America.
Good band.
And he wrote this book about it. And as a kid, I've read this book. And what I love... Has anyone read the book? No. What I loved about the book is it was really real, right? It didn't feel like it was a novel. It just felt like this band from Britain that were a bit well-known, but not massively well-known in America, and what their daily experiences were like. And it put me very much in the same mind when I read this, that I was taking your journey through this whole world of music that just started at the earliest age and opened up. And every time I got to a new chapter, it was like, where are we going to go next with this? So...
It was a fabulous journey, and still is, actually. And it all started, really, the session thing started in 1973. So this is really my 50th anniversary, and that's why we're doing this thing. Thank you.
Well, as it says on the back, over 500 albums, 50 #1 singles.
Apparently.
Yes. I mean, that is an unbelievably prolific record by anyone's standards. When you first picked up a guitar and at your parents' home, and you thought, yeah, I like music, did you ever have an inkling that where it might take you?
No, I think I had ambition pretty early on. I mean, the first guitar was, in fact, a ukulele, because my hands were too small to play a full-size guitar. So a ukulele when I was 5 years old, and I used to be dragged into the lounge and play it for my mum and dad's friends and stuff. And but it wasn't until my hands grew a bit and I started picking up a proper six-string that I really understood what I was doing. And then at the same time, it coincided with my uncles, who were the Kinks, Ray and Dave Davis. They started a band called the Ravens, and I used to watch them disappearing up the motorway in their Thames van and coming back the next day with lipstick all over the van, with adoring fans. And I thought, this looks like fun.
That's the kind of life, right?
Yeah, I can do with that.
So, did you kind of have a sense with them that was a journey that was going to take them a long way as well? Was there something about that?
I mean, it was a different business then. 1963, 64, the Kinks really got going with a song called You Really Got Me. And I was around. I used to sit with Dave practicing, and he came up with this idea of... He had a funny little amplifier which made a terrible sort of distorted noise. And he liked the sound of it, but it just wasn't loud enough. So he soldered a wire onto the back of this little thing and plugged it into an AC30, and he made a great noise, and it was the beginning of You Really Got Me.
Wow! So that's really the introduction of, as you say in the book, the reintroduction of the preamp concept going into a power amp. Really,
he kind of invented it, yeah. And also, I guess, heavy metal. You know, that in 1964 was, what the hell's this? It was a new thing.
Was that like a Marty McFly kind of thing at the time? Right, it's like... I mean, that's Back to the Future, right? That's almost inventing rock music.
Almost,
right there,
yeah. And he didn't know what he was doing, and it was probably highly dangerous to what he was up to. But that's what made the Kinks successful. That sound.
And so you're watching them disappear off, come back, lipstick on the van, the life of musicians, and they were very generous to you, weren't they? They encouraged you. And gave you a very nice guitar.
Yeah, Dave gave me a Vox Phantom. I've got a picture of it somewhere, but it was shaped like a 50-pence piece. And that was my first proper electric guitar. That was about 1963.
It had the little switches on them.
No, it had a sort of toggle switch down the bottom, but it was a strange-looking thing. There's a picture of it somewhere, but you don't want to find that.
But then, of course... was it Ray or Dave that gave you the funny beaten-up old Telecaster?
Yeah, that was a bit later. That was 1970. The Kinks came back from America, and back then you could find interesting and old and valuable guitars all over the place, in junk stores mainly. And he came back with a Flying V, Gibson Flying V, which was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And this beat-up old butterscotch-coloured Telecaster. It looked like a Telecaster. And we found out later that it's officially known as a no-caster. And I had no idea how valuable it was going to become, but now it's pretty unique.
Right, because that was made in the early 50s, right?
1951 in August.
And as I understand it, this is the great thing about the book, right? Not only do we get to take your journey and understand how you evolved into this incredible session man, but you're also sharing these little moments of history in the music industry that kind of form what we know as the industry from a musician's side of point of view. So the no-caster was because, was it Ludwig or was it Slingerland or? Gretsch had a drum kit called the Broadcaster.
That's right.
Which is what the guitar was originally going to be called. Legal battles, so they just made the guitar with no name on it to start with.
That's it for 3 months.
And you got one of those, right?
Yeah,
wow.
I've got one of those.
That's worth
it's
a
good thing.
As we're going through, by the way, I mean, I'm kind of asking selected highlights of things that I was just fascinated and want to know more about. If you have questions, like I say, do feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get the mic over and you can ask. And we've got plenty of time tonight.
Yeah.
And the guitar is there, right? So, you know, every now and then we might get a riff.
You might get a little racket.
So your first session. Well, let's just before the first session though. You've got a band. That's the March Hare.
March Hare, yes.
March Hare, yes. When you did that and you got your first paycheck.
14 quid.
14 quid. right, which was still quite a lot in those days.
No, between us.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, £2 each, whatever. Some expenses.
Yeah.
So when I first did my first gig, I just remember that feeling. This is what I got some money, and I thought, this is what I want to do. It didn't really matter how much it was. Someone had paid me to do the thing I love to do. Yeah. Was that kind of the feeling that you got there?
Yeah. It took a while to establish, a following and a place to play. You know, we used to play in the youth club in Kingsbury, which is not far from here. And just friends and girlfriends and people would show up initially. But it's good grounding because it teaches you how to play in front of people and overcome those nerves, right. Which are inevitable.
How did you get your chops? Because there was no YouTube, right?
No,
you can come watch, and it was...
That's the big difference from then and now, because you used to just sit in a room with another guitar player or a few people and explore ideas, musical ideas, and learn. It's brilliant.
And was that kind of like someone would tell, I've got to do riff? Oh,
yeah.
What about this? Oh, you kind of just...
Pretty much, yeah. I had a friend called Brian who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he was always my challenge. He was better than me, and I used to learn pieces secretly and go and play them to Brian, and he would do the same in return. And it was good grounding. It made us improve at a good rate.
Right. So, 50 years, almost to the week, since the first session.
Almost, yeah.
Who was that and where was that?
Okay, I used to sit in the back of Kinks Studios, which is my uncle's studio in Hornsey, not far from here, and just watch what happened. And they signed a couple of artists to Conk Records back then, and the first one was a lady called Claire Hamill. And they had her in the studio, and I used to sit in the corner and watch people put tracks together, like 4 or 5 good players. And I was fascinated by it, and I thought, how do they do that? And where do all these ideas come from? And so whilst they were out at dinner one night, I snuck in the studio, and I was noodling away on Ray's Telecaster. And I didn't know, but Claire had come back from dinner early, and she was listening to me. And she came in the studio and said, "You can play." I said, "Well, that's nice, thank you." She said, "I need a guitar part on my next track, so would you like to come and play on it?" That was the first session I ever did.
Wow. And that kind of encouragement can be life-changing, right? That when somebody that you respect says, "You're really good at that," it's a validation, right?
It kind of is, yeah. And also the other people that were on that session, they were established kind of session players. Philip Chen was there. He was a great bass player. And he gave me a bit of advice, and we got chatting, and he said, just whatever, if you do it, it's probably advisable to learn how to read music. But I never did. And he said, and once you start getting gigs, just say yes to everything and figure it out later. And that was great advice, because,
I think there's quite a few musicians here tonight that would that understand and appreciate that, right? It's like opportunity arrives in the strangest places. And if you say yes, you can be there for it, right? But if you say no, you'll never know what you missed.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. And you've got to kind of be ready and willing and able. That's the key to it all. You've got to be able to play pretty much anything that anybody throws at you. And they used to throw some pretty weird stuff at you.
What was the kind of the hairiest session in the early days for you?
That's a tough one. I mean, I just enjoyed it. It was a journey, a networking thing, and I would do a session, and that would lead on to another one, and blah blah blah. And I remember an early session with Ralph McTell. Anybody remember Ralph McTell?
Yes.
Streets of London. That was a very early session for me, and it was at Good Earth Studio, and Tony Visconti was producing it. And that made a connection to David Bowie. I didn't know at the time, but a week later I was still living at home with my parents, and the phone rang at 4 o'clock in the morning, and my mum came up the stairs and said, "Philip, there's a Mr. Bowie on the phone for you." And I thought it was someone messing about, but it actually was him. And he said, "I'm in Berlin recording an album with Iggy Pop. And I've heard that you can play a bit, and we'd like you to come over to Germany as soon as possible."
Wow, what a call.
It was a great call, yeah. But that's how it worked back then. You know, it was all about reputation and about, networking.
Well, now you've got to tell us about that session, right?
Okay, yeah. So I booked myself a flight. In fact, they booked me a flight, I think. I picked up my Nocaster and I got on a plane and went to Munich, because they'd moved to Munich by then. Spent a week with David Bowie and Iggy Pop in the studio. It was all a bit scary. The electricity between the two of them was pretty intense, and they were pretty weird together. And the sessions started at 1 a.m. every night, and we would finish about 10 or 11 in the morning, because that's the only time they could get the studio time.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Because Thin Lizzy were in the studio during the day.
Wow. So when the boys are back in town,
Yeah.
you got to... I had to, come on. You have to take the early shifts. I can't imagine David Bowie and Iggy Pop kind of behind the control room glass at 3 o'clock in the morning going, would they say things like, "Make it more blue"? Is that the kind of weirdness? Or?
No, it was even more vague than that, really. They would be firing ideas at each other, and I'd be stuck in the middle trying to figure it all out. But the first track we did was called "Night Clubbing" on that album, and it was a good track. There wasn't much on it at that time. There was a drum track and a guide bass and some vocals, but nothing much. And David said to me, "Okay, you're walking down Waldorf Street at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're passing different clubs, and I want you to play what's coming out of those doors." I said, "Any indication of key?" No, he said, "Don't worry about key. Don't worry about anything. Just wail." And so I found a wah-wah pedal, which obviously belonged to Thin Lizzy, and plugged it in one of their Marshalls and made a terrible racket, and they loved it.
You see, as a session man, you can't really plan for anything. You just got to be prepared for everything, I guess, really.
That's right, and that was the grounding that was kind of happening around there, because you never knew what you were going to walk into. In the early days, a session was 3 hours, and if you had a good day, you could do 4 different sessions for 4 different artists in 4 different studios in one day.
Wow.
So I used to carry 6 guitars, 2 amps, and a few pedals to cover me for all the eventualities.
And you'd be driving around central London's studio to...
Yeah. I need some water. Is any water about?
Yeah, and do you want to put your password into the seat? Any questions whilst we're here, by the way? We're in the early 70s. We are, that's it, into the session world. And like I say, when reading this book, it's actually, I kind of got sucked into, I don't know if you all felt this the same, right? You got sucked in this world, partly because I know it as a musician, but partly actually even as an outsider would find this story, the stuff that people just don't know, that how records are made, right? It's like a mystery to most people, because there's a whole language in a studio, there's a whole set of equipment that you would never normally see. What was the first track that you worked on of significant success that you kind of thought, oh, I think this could go somewhere?
That could probably be David Essex. I mean, I worked with David Essex in 1974. That was my first major artist, and he was huge then. He was a pop idol, David Essex. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Anybody remember? Hold Me Close. Hold me close, don't let me go.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. And so we did a pretty serious world tour. We went to Australia, we did Europe, we did a lot of gigs in England. And it was great lesson, you know, how to do it in front of a lot of people every night. What was your question again?
Well, the question was, what was the first track that you were working on that you kind of went, oh, there's something going on in this, and it goes on to be a successful track?
Maybe it was Joan Armour Trading. I started working with Joan in 1980. I think that was the first kind of musical, interesting gig that I did after David Essex and all the rest of it.
She was a bit tough on you at first, wasn't she?
She was tough on everybody. She was a difficult lady. But, you know, I worked with her quite a bit. We did an album called To the Limit, and it was produced by Glyn Johns, who was a bit of a
legend.
A bit of a legend then, yeah, and still is, I suppose. And we went on tour in 1981, I think it was, around the world again. And again, it's part of the learning process. But musically, that was probably the most interesting thing I did up to that date.
Right. And interesting, you've kind of worked with like David and Murray Head, is right?
Murray Head,
right?
Yes.
Who also have acting careers as well, right? They're kind of in this area where they're... Because another thing about this book reminded me... Does anyone remember the movie That'll Be the Day? Yeah. Although it's got nothing to do with it, there was just something very British. This is a very British story, right?
Yeah.
And there's something about That'll Be the Day and, you know, David Essex becoming the rock star through the 70s, right? Made me reminiscent of that story as well. But you have worked with some incredibly flamboyant and theatrical people, should we say.
I guess I did, yes.
That was just the happenstance, I guess, really.
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, at that time, I did some stuff with Dennis Waterman as well. He was an actor.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure, it was a crossover. And in between, there was a few moments of bizarre music. I mean, I got involved with Frank Zappa on a session, which was early days of that kind of genre of music. And it was a bit of a shock because nobody knew he was going to be there. But the album was for a guy called El Shankar, who's an Indian violin player. And we arrived at 9:30 at Advision Studios, which was in Baker Street somewhere. And sitting behind the desk was Frank Zappa. And we went, fuck me, it's Frank Zappa. And we didn't know he was going to be there, but he was nice. And we did some very interesting tracks that week, including a song called Darlene, which I could probably try and find and play for you.
I think that would be nice. Phil's actually got some clips of stuff that can illustrate some of these stories as well, which is... we're going to line up with the screen behind us. I'll move over a little bit there with the white to talk to him. Oh, we'll come in a second. We'll come to you. Okay.
So that...
was that like an electric sitar in there? Or how did you get that tonality?
That's... that track, it's so complicated. I mean, that's Simon Phillips on drums. Remember
Yeah,
Simon?
yeah.
Plays with Toto and, still a fantastic drummer. And he was one of the best readers in London. He could read anything, but he couldn't read that.
Really?
He couldn't even write it down. And all of us sat in a circle in the studio trying to figure it out, because it's a very complicated arrangement. Only lasts 3 minutes.
Right.
And it took us...
And it's back again.
And it took us 3 days to record.
Wow. So, well, that probably answers my almost first question, which is one of the hairiest sessions you've had to work on. Sounds like it's quite involved to try and work out what that rhythm is. We have a question, though, for you from this gentleman over here. We're going to try the first question on our fabulous radio mic. Please introduce yourself, say where you're from, and ask the question.
Hi, my name's Mike. I'm actually a guitar student of Steve Young.
Okay.
So you've obviously played with some incredible guitarists, many of whom may well have been your heroes. Are there any guitar or heroes of yours that you never got to play with, either by choice or having turned them down, or wish you hadn't turned them down?
No, I said yes to everything. Consequently, I did all kinds of stuff. But the one person that missed me out, if you like, is probably Donald Fagen. I'm a massive fan of Donald Fagen and anything that Steely Dan did. So that's the one person I would love to have worked with. I suppose it's not too late.
No, it's not. Absolutely. I think that's manifesting, right? Donald, you heard it here first? Yes. So during the sound check, Phil plays this beautiful guitar beautifully with something I've never heard played on the guitar before.
Yeah, I thought I'd learn it. I mean, it's not really a guitar thing, but it's... I thought it's a bit of a challenge, so I had a go. I just hope I don't fuck it up.
Gio, we've got a little bit of a low hum on the stage coming from somewhere. Is it Steve's guitar, maybe?
Does that sound all right?
Got it.
Okay.
Beautiful. That shouldn't be able to be played on a guitar. That's how good you are.
No,
that's this very cool piano thing transposed beautifully to the guitar.
It took a lot of working out. But, it's a nice thing, isn't it?
It is. Well, another interesting thing that you mentioned in the book, in the session world, right? obviously your job is to come in and make the records, add to the record whatever the producer or the artist wants. And there's that fine line between creating a guitar part that kind of supersedes what's already there and becomes something else in its own right, and something that sits in with the track.
Yeah.
That's a challenge, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Sometimes it was important not to be too important, if you know what I mean, just to be there. George Michael was one of those. He didn't want anything that could possibly detract from his voice. So if I did play anything too interesting, he would say, "No, don't do that." But you know, it depends who you're working with. Sometimes you were expected to contribute something to the session and give something that they hadn't thought of.
Right.
And they were the good sessions. I enjoyed those because you could actually be creative.
So now, end of the 70s, early 80s, you're doing dozens of sessions a week, you're highly in demand, but there comes a moment where you suddenly start moving into the world of touring at great length, which takes you away from the session worlds in the studios and creates both new, I'm sure, challenges and opportunities and a whole different way of working. Yeah,
true. I'd done an album with an Irish singer-songwriter called Paul Brady, who was a fantastic artist, a great writer and a great singer. And we did an album called True for You, which did very well for him. And we toured it, mainly in Europe, and we did like 20 gigs in Ireland. So we were very comfortable with the set, and very comfortable with Brady. He came to London and to play at the Mean Fiddler, which is in Harlesden, up the road. And I was up on the stage, and he said, "Yeah, I remember you at the Mean Fiddler, and in January, after Christmas, I'm going to go into the studio. It'd be nice if you could drop along." Oh. So I did. And that was the beginning of the Journeyman album.
Wow.
And so I arrived at the studio, and Phil Collins was on drums, and Pino Palladino was on bass, and I think Alan Clark was there. And we recorded a track called Bad Love, which was a really nice tune. And I think that was kind of Eric's way of auditioning me for his tour, because soon after that we went away for 2.5 years, basically.
As you do. Yeah. How was that though? That's a big jump, right? That's you're working with the greatest musicians in the world, and you're about to tour with one of the biggest artists of his day on a 2.5 year tour. That was that like a mind thing, like?
I don't know.
Or did it just seem natural at the next stage?
It felt pretty natural by that point. I don't think I was nervous. I mean, everybody in Eric's band was so good. It was, probably the best band in the world at the time. And Steve Ferroni and Nathan East, Greg Fillinganes, Ray Cooper. It was an amazing band. Is this where you got the nickname Private? That was Ferroni's nickname for me, Private Palmer. Right. And he said, "Listen, if you ever want to, fit in with this band, you have to do exactly what I say, and eventually you might become Corporal Palmer." Oh. And he dragged me around Europe because he was a bit of a drinker in those days, and we used to go and get very drunk together. And he was also one of the most good-looking men I've ever met, probably still is. And he used to get followed around by some really pretty, stunning young ladies. And so I got dragged along on that for a while, which was fun. There's a book, all right? There's more stuff in the book.